The year 2025 began with a seismic shock to North American trade, sending ripples through every major industry and household. Overnight, the rules of commerce that had governed the continent for decades were upended, leaving businesses scrambling to adapt and governments bracing for impact. The Trump administration unleashed sweeping tariffs, igniting a fierce trade war with Mexico and Canada. The announcement came suddenly, catching many by surprise and immediately straining diplomatic ties between the three nations. Trade officials rushed to emergency meetings as the news spread across global markets. A 25% tariff was slapped on a vast array of imports from both neighbors, effectively building a financial wall around the U.S. From auto parts to agricultural products, the new tariffs touched nearly every sector, raising costs for American consumers and businesses alike. Canadian oil faced a targeted 10% tariff, while tariffs on Chinese goods were also raised, hitting key sectors like electric vehicles. The move was intended to pressure foreign competitors, but it also risked retaliation and further escalation. The business community and international partners reacted with alarm, as industries reliant on cross-border supply chains faced catastrophic disruption. Manufacturers warned of layoffs, and retailers braced for shortages and price hikes. The uncertainty sent shockwaves through boardrooms and small businesses alike. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent defended the move as a long-term inflation fix, but markets panicked and growth projections turned negative. Economists cautioned that the tariffs could backfire, hurting American competitiveness and undermining investor confidence. The U.S. stock market tumbled, and the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta forecast a significant economic contraction. Investors scrambled to reassess their portfolios, while analysts warned of a looming recession if the trade war dragged on. Instead of protecting American industries, the tariffs pushed the nation toward recession. Factories slowed production, layoffs mounted, and consumer confidence plummeted as the effects rippled through the economy. This aggressive stance set the stage for a dramatic and contentious chapter in North American relations, with the leaders on all sides preparing for a prolonged and uncertain battle over the future of trade on the continent. In response, Mexico and Canada quickly forged a unified front. On September 18, 2025, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney met Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum in Mexico City, signaling solidarity. The leaders pledged to deepen economic ties and resist U.S. protectionism, vowing to walk together through the crisis. Carney praised North American trade cooperation, highlighting what was at stake. Their alliance aimed to increase leverage in future negotiations and show they would not be divided. This united front transformed the dispute into a bloc resistance, shifting the continent's geopolitical dynamics. The stage was set for a more complex and protracted struggle over North America's economic future. Canada responded to the U.S. tariffs with rare ferocity, surprising many who had expected a more measured approach. The government's reaction was swift and resolute, signaling that this was not just a minor trade dispute, but a direct challenge to Canadian sovereignty and economic stability. Ottawa called the move a hostile act and prepared a massive list of retaliatory tariffs on over $100 billion in U.S. goods. These tariffs targeted a wide range of American products, from steel and aluminum to everyday consumer goods, sending a clear message that Canada would not back down easily. The message was clear: for every action, there would be an equal and opposite reaction. Canada was determined to match the U.S. move, dollar for dollar, product for product, making it clear that any aggression would be met with firm resistance. Labor leaders, especially from Unifor, called for resistance, reflecting deep anxiety among workers tied to cross-border supply chains. The threat to jobs was real, and the uncertainty rippled through factories and communities dependent on trade with the U.S. The public and unions rallied behind the government, framing the issue as national economic survival. Across the country, Canadians from all walks of life voiced their support, seeing the tariffs as an attack on their livelihoods and way of life. This defiant stand shattered decades of camaraderie between the two countries, replacing it with mistrust and confrontation. The once friendly border now symbolized a growing divide, as leaders exchanged sharp words and negotiations grew tense. Canada demonstrated its resolve to protect its industries, even at the cost of a prolonged conflict. Factories ramped up production, and government officials toured industrial sites, reassuring workers that their interests would be defended at all costs. The nation drew a line in the sand, asserting its right to defend its economic interests. This was more than a trade dispute. it was a matter of national pride and determination. The trade war marked a turning point, testing the limits of the North American alliance. Long-standing agreements were now under strain, and the future of cross-border cooperation hung in the balance. Canada's strong reaction showed it would not be bullied by its largest trading partner. The government's stance inspired a sense of unity and determination among Canadians, who were ready to weather the storm together. The conflict was now set to escalate, with both sides digging in for a prolonged and uncertain battle that would shape the future of North American trade for years to come. The new tariffs jolted the North American automotive industry, built on decades of cross-border supply chains. A 25% tariff on vehicles and parts from Mexico and Canada hit American automakers like Ford and GM hard, threatening profit margins and production models. Electric vehicles, assembled in Mexico and reliant on Chinese components, faced a double blow from tariffs, jeopardizing affordability and adoption. Foreign automakers with U.S. plants like Volkswagen and Hyundai gained a competitive edge, shielded from the tariffs. Analysts speculated Ford and GM might shift focus back to petrol-powered vehicles. The highly integrated industry now faced fragmentation, uncertainty, and diminished global competitiveness. Consumers and workers across all three countries braced for the fallout. The tariffs created a bitter rift within North American auto unions. The UAW in the U.S. supported the tariffs, arguing they protected American jobs after years of manufacturing decline. In contrast, Canada's Unifor vehemently opposed the levies, warning of catastrophic job losses across the integrated supply chain. Unifor argued there are no purely American or Canadian cars, only North American cars. The AFL-CIO issued a cautious statement, acknowledging trade issues but warning of the harm a trade war could inflict on workers in both countries. The UAW's stance risked legitimizing policies that could ultimately undermine labor solidarity. The tariff dispute fractured unions, exposing the fragility of international labor alliances. The Trump administration escalated tensions with provocative statements and dramatic actions. President Trump suggested Canada should become the 51st state, a remark received as a profound insult. He ordered the Gulf of Mexico renamed the Gulf of America on U.S. maps, angering Mexico. Reports emerged of a secret executive order authorizing U.S. military operations inside Mexico to attack drug cartels, triggering outrage and a firm rebuke from President Sheinbaum. These moves poisoned diplomatic relations, shifting the conflict from economic policy to national pride and sovereignty. The wounds inflicted would linger long after the tariffs were gone. The trade war's impact rippled across the North American economy, hitting consumers directly in their wallets and daily lives. Everyday essentials, from groceries to gasoline, became more expensive almost overnight, leaving families and individuals scrambling to adjust their budgets. A 10% tariff on Canadian oil drove up U.S. fuel costs, especially in regions reliant on Canadian crude. Commuters and businesses alike felt the pinch at the pump, as transportation and delivery costs soared, feeding into higher prices for goods across the board. Power grid stability was threatened, as 25% tariffs on Mexican transformers worsened shortages and risked outages. Utilities struggled to replace critical equipment, raising concerns about reliability and the potential for blackouts in major cities. The nuclear sector faced higher costs as Canadian uranium imports were disrupted. This not only increased expenses for power producers, but also threatened the long-term sustainability of clean energy projects across the continent. Uncertainty loomed over electricity imports from Canada, potentially raising bills for millions. Households and small businesses braced for unpredictable spikes in monthly expenses, making financial planning even more challenging. While some U.S. manufacturing jobs might be shielded in the short term, the broader economy faced rising costs and potential job losses. Companies struggled to absorb higher input prices, and some were forced to cut back on hiring or even lay off workers. The tariffs, meant to protect, risked widespread disruption across sectors. Supply chains slowed, border delays increased, and uncertainty made it harder for businesses to plan for the future. Rising energy costs acted as a tax on the entire economy, reducing consumer spending and business margins. Small businesses, already operating on thin profit lines, face tough choices about staffing and investment. The promise of revitalized factories was overshadowed by the reality of higher prices and job losses. For many, the hope of economic renewal gave way to anxiety about the future as the ripple effects of tariffs continued to spread. As autumn 2025 unfolds, the trade war casts a long shadow over North America's future. The looming review of the USMCA trade pact, once a tool for modernization, now threatens to dismantle decades of integration. Hostility and retaliation have poisoned the atmosphere for negotiations, with Mexico and Canada forming a united bloc against an isolated US. The risk of a complete breakdown in talks is dangerously high. Decoupling could unravel supply chains, cause job losses, and raise prices continent-wide. North America faces a crossroads: economic nationalism versus cooperation and shared prosperity. The outcome of the USMCA review will shape the continent's economic landscape for decades. The stakes for workers, consumers, and industries could not be higher.